The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned industrial district as Detective Sarah Chen stepped out of her unmarked car. The concrete buildings stood like silent sentinels, their broken windows reflecting fragments of light that seemed to mock the darkness that had consumed this place for weeks. She pulled her jacket tighter against the October chill and surveyed the scene that had become her second home. 3 months. 3 months since the first shot had rung out from somewhere in these maze-like structures, claiming the life of Marcus Rodriguez, a construction worker who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Since then, 7 more victims had fallen to the phantom sniper who seemed to appear and disappear like smoke in the wind. Sarah's radio crackled to life, breaking the morning silence. "Detective Chen, we've got movement in Sector 7. SWAT team is requesting your presence." She acknowledged the call and made her way through the debris-strewn streets, her boots crunching on broken glass and fallen leaves. The entire district had been evacuated after the third shooting, leaving behind a ghost town that felt more like a war zone than a place where families had once lived and worked. As she approached the tactical command center that had been hastily erected in what used to be a corner grocery store, Sarah reflected on how this case had consumed her life. Her marriage to David had been strained before the sniper appeared, but the endless nights of surveillance and the constant pressure to catch a killer who seemed to know their every move had pushed them to the breaking point. Last week, he had moved out of their apartment, taking with him the last remnants of the life she had tried so desperately to maintain outside of her work. "Chen, over here." Captain Rodriguez, no relation to the first victim despite sharing the same name, waved her toward a cluster of monitors showing feed from various surveillance cameras positioned throughout the district. His face was etched with the same exhaustion that had marked all of them over the past months. "What do we have?" Sarah asked, studying the screens that showed empty streets and abandoned buildings from multiple angles. Thermal imaging picked up a heat signature around 3 a.m., moving between buildings 12 and 14, Rodriguez explained, pointing to a section of the district where several shootings had occurred. "But here's the strange part, when our teams moved in, they found evidence of someone having been there, but no clear exit route. It's like our sniper just vanished into thin air again." Sarah had heard this story too many times before. The sniper seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to disappear without a trace, leaving behind only the devastation of another life lost and families shattered. The media had dubbed the killer the Ghost, and the nickname had stuck, much to the frustration of the task force assigned to the case. "Any ballistics evidence this time?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Rodriguez shook his head. "Clean as always. No shell casings, no fingerprints, no DNA. Whoever this is knows exactly what they're doing." Dr. Amanda Foster, the FBI's behavioral analyst assigned to the case, looked up from her notes. She was a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. "The precision is remarkable," she said, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone who had studied too many killers. "Every shot has been a single, clean kill from distances exceeding 400 meters. No missed shots, no collateral damage, and no pattern to the victim selection that we can determine." Sarah studied the crime scene photos spread across a nearby table. 8 faces stared back at her, men and women of different ages, races, and backgrounds. Marcus Rodriguez, the construction worker. Janet Liu, a social worker who had been walking to her car after a late-night shift. Thomas Green, a delivery driver. Maria Santos, a nurse heading home from the hospital. Each life cut short by a single bullet from an unknown assailant with motivations that remained frustratingly unclear. "What about the theory that we're dealing with multiple shooters?" Sarah asked, voicing a possibility that had been debated extensively among the task force. Dr. Foster shook her head. "The ballistics are consistent with a single weapon, and the shooting style is too uniform. We're definitely dealing with one individual. Someone with military or law enforcement training, based on the precision and tactical awareness they've demonstrated." The radio crackled again, and all eyes turned to the operator monitoring communications. "All units, we have a possible sighting in Sector 4. Civilian reports seeing someone moving between buildings on the north side." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she grabbed her radio and headed for the door. Sector 4 was on the opposite side of the district from where the thermal signature had been detected earlier. If the sniper was indeed still in the area, they might finally have a chance to corner them. As she drove through the empty streets toward the reported sighting, Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. The sniper had never remained in the area after a shooting for more than a few hours. What could be keeping them here now? Was it possible they were injured? Had something gone wrong with their usual escape route? The buildings in Sector 4 were different from the rest of the district, older warehouses and manufacturing facilities that had been abandoned long before the recent evacuations. Their brick facades were weathered and covered in graffiti, and many had loading docks and fire escapes that could provide multiple entry and exit points for someone trying to avoid detection. Sarah parked her car at the perimeter established by the patrol officers who had responded to the civilian report and approached the sergeant in charge. "Where did the witness see the movement?" she asked. "Third building from the corner," the sergeant replied, pointing toward a 4-story warehouse with most of its windows boarded up. Civilian was walking his dog outside the perimeter when he saw what looked like someone moving on the second floor. Could have been nothing, but, given everything that's been happening. Sarah nodded and studied the building. If someone was inside, they would have multiple ways to escape if they detected the approaching police presence. The standard approach would be to surround the building and, then, conduct a systematic search, but their previous attempts using this method had yielded nothing but frustration. As she was considering their options, her radio buzzed with a transmission that made her blood run cold. "All units, shots fired in Sector 7. We have an officer down." Sarah's world seemed to tilt on its axis as she processed the information. Sector 7 was where the thermal signature had been detected earlier that morning. If there was still someone in the building they were about to search, and shots had just been fired across the district, were they dealing with multiple shooters after all? "This is Detective Chen," she radioed back. "I need confirmation on the officer's status and exact location of the shooting." The response came quickly, but it brought no comfort. Officer Martinez was providing security at the perimeter when a single shot was fired from an unknown location. He's been taken to Metro General with a gunshot wound to the shoulder. Condition is stable but serious. Sarah felt a mixture of relief that the officer would survive and frustration that their phantom sniper had claimed another victim, even if this one had been fortunate enough to live. But the timing troubled her deeply. How could someone be shooting in Sector 7 when they potentially had another suspect cornered in Sector 4? Dr. Foster's voice came through the radio, and Sarah could hear the excitement beneath her professional calm. "Detective Chen, I need you to maintain your position in Sector 4. The timing of this shooting is significant. If our sniper is trying to draw our attention away from your location, it suggests there might be something or someone there that they don't want us to find." As Sarah processed this information, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. In one of the unboarded windows on the second floor of the warehouse, a shadow had moved across the glass. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but, after 3 months of hunting a ghost, she had learned to notice things that others might miss. She keyed her radio but kept her voice low. "I have confirmed movement in the target building. Requesting backup and tactical support." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity as additional units arrived and established a perimeter around the warehouse. The SWAT team took positions at all possible exit points while Sarah and 2 other detectives prepared to enter the building from the main entrance. As they approached the heavy metal door that served as the warehouse's primary entrance, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and anxiety that came with potentially dangerous situations. Her training had taught her to channel these feelings into heightened awareness and focus, but something about this moment felt different. After 3 months of chasing shadows, the possibility that they might finally confront their quarry was both thrilling and terrifying. The door was unlocked, which struck Sarah as odd given the abandoned nature of the building. As they entered the warehouse, their flashlights cut through the darkness and revealed a space filled with abandoned machinery and stacks of old inventory covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was stale and carried the musty smell of decay and neglect. They moved systematically through the ground floor, checking every possible hiding place and looking for any sign that someone had been there recently. Sarah's training had taught her to look for disturbances in dust patterns, displaced objects, or any other indicators of human presence, but the ground floor appeared to have been undisturbed for months or even years. As they prepared to move to the second floor, Sarah's radio crackled with an update from the command center.
Detective Chen, our surveillance shows no movement from the building since you entered.
Thermal imaging is inconclusive due to the building's construction materials. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and led her team toward the staircase that would take them to the second floor. Each step seemed to echo through the empty building despite their efforts to move quietly, and she found herself holding her breath as they reached the landing. The second floor was divided into several smaller rooms that had once served as offices and storage areas.
Unlike the ground floor, this level showed clear signs of recent occupation.
Dust had been disturbed in several areas, and there were places where someone had obviously sat or lain down on the floor. In one of the rooms, Sarah discovered something that made her call for the others to join her. On a makeshift table constructed from old crates, someone had assembled what appeared to be a detailed surveillance setup. Maps of the district were spread out with various locations marked, and several photographs showed different buildings from angles that suggested they had been taken from elevated positions. "Looks like our sniper has been using this place as a base of operations," one of her colleagues observed, carefully examining the materials without disturbing them. But Sarah's attention had been drawn to something else entirely. In the corner of the room, partially hidden beneath a tarp, was a sleeping bag and several personal items that looked distinctly feminine. A small mirror, a hairbrush, and what appeared to be women's clothing were neatly arranged nearby. As she studied these items, trying to process their significance, a sound from elsewhere in the building made all three detectives freeze. Footsteps, light but distinctly audible, were moving across the floor above them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized their mistake. They had assumed the movement the witness had seen was on the second floor, but the building had 4 floors, and they had failed to properly secure the upper levels before beginning their search. She keyed her radio with trembling fingers.
This is Detective Chen. We have confirmed presence in the building, 3rd or 4th floor. Requesting immediate backup and asking all perimeter units to watch for movement in upper-level windows. As they prepared to continue their search to the upper floors, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything they thought they knew about their sniper was about to change. The feminine items in the room had challenged her assumptions about who they were hunting, and the careful organization of the surveillance materials suggested a level of planning and intelligence that went beyond what they had previously attributed to their suspect. The footsteps above had stopped, and the building had returned to an ominous silence that seemed to press down on them from all sides. Sarah knew that somewhere above them, the person they had been hunting for 3 months was waiting, and she had no way of knowing what they would find when they finally came face to face with the phantom who had terrorized an entire city. As they began their ascent to the 3rd floor, Sarah thought about Officer Martinez lying in a hospital bed and the 8 victims who had lost their lives to this invisible enemy. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would either bring justice for those victims or add more names to a list that had already grown too long. The old wooden stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed, and Sarah found herself counting each step, trying to maintain her focus while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. 3 months of investigation, hundreds of hours of surveillance, and countless sleepless nights had led to this moment, and she knew that everything they had worked for hung in the balance of what they would discover in the floors above. The 3rd floor of the warehouse stretched out before them like a maze of abandoned offices and storage rooms. Unlike the lower floors, this level had retained more of its original structure, with plasterboard walls creating a series of interconnected spaces that could easily conceal someone trying to avoid detection. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing water stains on the ceiling and peeling paint that had fallen to the floor like dead leaves. Each room they cleared brought them closer to whatever or whoever had made those footsteps, but the silence had become so complete that Sarah began to wonder if she had imagined the sounds altogether. Her 2 colleagues, Detective Frank Morrison and Detective Lisa Park, moved with the same careful precision that had been drilled into them during their training, but she could see the tension in their shoulders and the way their hands remained close to their weapons. 3rd floor clear, Morrison whispered into his radio as they finished checking the last room. Moving to 4th floor. The staircase to the 4th floor was narrower than the others, and Sarah noticed that the dust here had been significantly disturbed. Fresh footprints were clearly visible in the beam of her flashlight,
and she felt her heart rate increase as she realized they were definitely not alone in the building. As they reached the fourth-floor landing, Sarah held up her hand to signal the others to stop. The layout here was different from the floors below. Instead of multiple rooms, this level appeared to be one large, open space that had probably been used for storage or light manufacturing. Moonlight filtered through several unboarded windows, creating patches of dim illumination that somehow made the shadows seem even darker. But it wasn't the layout of the room that made Sarah freeze in place. It was the figure sitting motionless in the center of the space, silhouetted against one of the moonlit windows. The person appeared to be a woman, sitting on what looked like an old wooden crate with her back turned toward them. She was completely still, so motionless that for a moment Sarah wondered if they were looking at a mannequin or some other object that had been arranged to look human in the dim light. "Police," Sarah called out, her voice echoing through the empty space. "Turn around slowly and keep your hands where we can see them." The figure didn't move or respond, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the October air filtering through the broken windows. She motioned for Morrison and Park to spread out and approach from different angles while she moved directly toward the seated figure. As she got closer, Sarah could see that it was indeed a woman, probably in her 30s, with dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders. She was wearing dark clothing that would have made her nearly invisible in the shadows, and something about her posture suggested exhaustion or defeat rather than defiance. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and show me your hands," Sarah repeated, stopping about 10 feet away from the figure. Her weapon was drawn but pointed toward the floor, and she tried to keep her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Finally, slowly, the woman began to turn around. What Sarah saw when their eyes met across the moonlit space would stay with her for the rest of her life. The woman was younger than she had first appeared, probably no more than 25, with dark eyes that held a depth of pain and exhaustion that seemed almost unbearable. Her face was streaked with tears, and her clothes were dirty and torn as if she had been living rough for an extended period. But what struck Sarah most was the expression of relief that crossed the woman's features when she saw the police officers. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible in the large space. "Please help me." Sarah felt her world shift as she processed what she was seeing. This wasn't the hardened killer she had been expecting to find. This was someone who looked broken, desperate, and genuinely afraid. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently, slowly holstering her weapon and taking a step closer. "Elena," the woman replied, her voice stronger now. "Elena Vasquez. I've been hiding here for 3 days, and I don't know what to do anymore." Morrison and Park had moved to flank Elena but kept their weapons lowered, clearly as confused by the situation as Sarah was. This wasn't at all what any of them had expected to find at the end of their 3-month hunt. "Elena, I'm Detective Chen," Sarah said, continuing to approach slowly. "Can you tell me why you've been hiding here?" Elena's eyes darted nervously between the 3 officers, and Sarah could see her hands trembling. "Because he's been hunting me," she said. "The man with the gun. He killed my brother, and now he's trying to kill me too." Sarah felt her understanding of the entire situation begin to crumble. "Your brother? Can you tell me your brother's name?" "Marcus Rodriguez," Elena whispered, and Sarah's blood ran cold. "He was working construction when someone shot him 3 months ago. The police said it was random, but it wasn't random. The man who killed him has been hunting our family, and I'm the only one left." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. Marcus Rodriguez had been the first victim of their sniper, the construction worker whose death had started their 3-month nightmare. If Elena was telling the truth, then everything they thought they knew about the case was wrong. "Elena, I need you to help me understand," Sarah said, slowly sitting down on another crate so she would be at eye level with the frightened woman. "You said someone has been hunting your family. Can you tell me who this person is?" Elena's story came out in broken fragments, interrupted by tears and moments when she seemed too overwhelmed to continue. 3 months earlier, her brother Marcus had witnessed something he shouldn't have seen while working at a construction site near the industrial district. A meeting between several men that had ended in violence, with one man killing another in what Marcus had assumed was some kind of drug deal gone wrong. Marcus had been hidden behind some equipment and hadn't been seen by the men involved, but he had been close enough to identify one of them as Vincent Carrera, a man with known connections to organized crime in the city. Marcus had gone to the police, but before he could provide a formal statement, he had been shot and killed by an unknown sniper.
The police told us it was random, Elena continued, wiping tears from her cheeks.
They said it was just bad luck, that Marcus was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
But I knew better.
Marcus had been scared about something for days before he died. He kept saying that he had seen something he shouldn't have, and that he was worried about what would happen if the wrong people found out.
Sarah listened to Elena's story with growing horror as she realized the implications of what she was hearing.
If Elena was telling the truth, then the sniper they had been hunting wasn't a random killer at all, but someone working to eliminate witnesses to a crime that had taken place months earlier.
After Marcus died, I started getting threats, Elena continued.
Phone calls in the middle of the night, people following me when I walked to work, someone breaking into my apartment while I was out. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to prove the threats were connected to Marcus's death. Morrison stepped forward, his expression troubled.
Elena, if you were being threatened, why didn't you accept police protection?
Elena's laugh was bitter and full of despair.
Because I didn't know who I could trust.
Marcus had gone to the police, and look what happened to him. For all I knew, the person hunting my family could have had connections inside the police department.
Sarah felt a chill as she considered this possibility.
It would explain how their sniper had seemed to stay one step ahead of their investigation, how they had managed to avoid capture despite months of intensive searching.
3 weeks ago, I saw him, Elena said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The man who's been hunting me. I was walking home from work when I noticed someone following me.
When I turned around to look, I saw a man with a rifle watching me from a rooftop across the street. I ran, and that night I heard on the news that someone else had been shot by the sniper.
Sarah's mind raced as she tried to reconcile Elena's story with what they knew about the other victims. Elena, the people who were shot over the past 3 months, did you know any of them? Elena shook her head.
I never heard their names before they were on the news.
But I think
he's been shooting other people to make it look random. To make it look like he's just some crazy person killing strangers, so that when he finally kills me, no one will connect it to what Marcus saw.
The horrifying logic of this strategy began to dawn on Sarah.
If someone wanted to eliminate a witness without drawing attention to the specific motive, creating a pattern of random killings would provide perfect cover.
Each additional victim would reinforce the impression that they were dealing with a madman rather than a calculated assassin. Why have you been staying here in the district?
Park asked.
Wouldn't it be safer to leave the city entirely? Elena's expression became even more desperate.
I tried to leave. 2 weeks ago, I packed everything I could carry and took a bus to my aunt's house in Phoenix.
But he found me there too. Someone shot at me through the window of my aunt's house the second night I was there. I realized that no matter where I went, he would find me, so I came back here to hide. Sarah was struggling to process the full implications of what Elena was telling them.
If her story was true, then 7 innocent people had died simply to provide cover for the planned murder of a witness to a crime. The level of cold-blooded calculation required for such a plan was almost incomprehensible.
Elena, you said you've been hiding here for 3 days, Sarah said. Have you seen the man you believe is hunting you during that time?
Every night, Elena replied, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks.
He comes to the district after dark and searches the buildings.
I think he knows I'm here somewhere, but these warehouses are like a maze.
I've been moving from building to building, trying to stay ahead of him.
Sarah's radio crackled to life, and Dr. Foster's voice filled the space.
Detective Chen, we need an update on your situation.
The shooting in Sector 7 appears to have been a diversion. We haven't been able to locate the shooter, and we're concerned that our suspect may have used the distraction to escape the perimeter. Sarah looked at Elena, who was staring at the radio with wide, frightened eyes. He's still out there, Elena whispered. Even now, while we're talking, he's probably planning how to get to me. Sarah keyed her radio, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to explain their situation to the command center. Dr. Foster, we've located a civilian in the building who claims to have information about the sniper case. I need you and Captain Rodriguez to come to our location immediately.
We may have been completely wrong about the nature of this case.
As they waited for backup to arrive, Sarah continued to question Elena, trying to build a complete picture of what had really been happening over the past 3 months. Elena described in detail the threatening phone calls she had received, the break-in at her apartment, and her growing certainty that someone was systematically hunting her.
Do you have any idea how this Vincent Carrera person would have known that your brother witnessed the killing? Sarah asked. Elena shook her head.
Marcus never told me exactly what he saw, just that it involved people who would hurt our family if they knew he had been there. But he did say something about there being other people at the construction site that day.
Maybe one of them saw Marcus and told Carrera?
The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation, and Sarah called out to identify herself before Dr. Foster and Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Both of them stopped short when they saw Elena sitting in the moonlight, clearly not what they had expected to find.
Sarah quickly briefed them on Elena's story, watching their expressions change from skepticism to shock as the implications of what they were hearing became clear.
If Elena was telling the truth, then they weren't dealing with a serial killer at all, but with a professional assassin who had murdered 7 innocent people to cover up the planned elimination of a witness. Elena, Dr. Foster said, approaching carefully, I need to ask you some difficult questions.
Do you have any proof of the threats you received? Phone records, evidence of the break-in at your apartment?
Elena reached into a small bag she had been carrying and pulled out an old cell phone. I saved some of the voicemails, she said. And I took pictures of my apartment after someone broke in and trashed it. As Dr. Foster examined Elena's phone, Sarah found herself looking out the windows toward the dark streets of the industrial district. Somewhere out there, a professional killer was hunting the woman sitting beside her, and they had spent 3 months chasing shadows while innocent people died.
Detective Chen, Dr.
Foster said, her voice tight with controlled anger, we need to get Elena out of here immediately and into protective custody. If her story is accurate, then she's in immediate danger, and we've been playing right into the real killer's hands. But even as they began planning Elena's extraction from the building, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The timing of Elena's appearance, the coincidence of finding her just as Officer Martinez was shot across the district, the convenient explanations for everything that had puzzled them about the case. As they prepared to move Elena to safety, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. In Elena's bag, partially visible beneath some clothing, was what appeared to be the edge of a military-style compass and a small notebook with handwriting that looked remarkably neat and organized for someone who had been living rough in abandoned buildings. The doubt that began to creep into Sarah's mind was small at first, but it grew stronger as she considered all the elements of Elena's story. Everything fit together almost too perfectly, explaining away every mysterious aspect of their investigation with a narrative that painted Elena as the victim rather than the perpetrator. As they escorted Elena toward the stairs, Sarah found herself wondering if they were saving a witness or walking directly into the trap of the most cunning killer she had ever encountered.
The police station felt almost surreal after 3 months of searching through abandoned buildings and empty streets.
Elena sat in the interview room, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands as she answered question after question from the assembled task force. Sarah watched from behind the one-way mirror, studying every gesture and facial expression as Elena repeated her story for the 3rd time that day. The details never changed. Elena's account of her brother's death, the threats she had received, and her weeks of hiding in the industrial district remained perfectly consistent. Dr. Foster had verified several elements of her story through independent sources. Marcus Rodriguez had indeed filed an initial report about witnessing a crime, though he had died before providing details. Elena's apartment had been broken into, and her landlord confirmed that she had disappeared suddenly, 3 weeks earlier without paying rent or giving notice. Her story checks out on every verifiable point, Captain Rodriguez said, joining Sarah at the observation window. Phone records confirm she received numerous calls from untraceable numbers in the weeks after her brother's death. The threatening voicemails on her phone are consistent with someone trying to intimidate a witness. Sarah nodded, but the nagging doubt that had started in the warehouse continued to grow. Something about Elena's demeanor during the questioning bothered her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The young woman appeared genuinely frightened and traumatized, but there were moments, brief flashes when she thought no one was looking, where her expression seemed to shift into something colder and more calculating.
"What about Vincent Carrera?" Sarah asked. "Have we been able to locate him?" Rodriguez's expression darkened. "That's where things get interesting.
Vincent Carrera was found dead in his apartment 2 days ago. Single gunshot wound to the head, execution style. His body had been there for at least a week, which means he was killed before most of the sniper attacks occurred." Sarah felt her blood run cold as she processed this information. If Carrera was dead before the sniper attacks began, then Elena's entire story about being hunted by someone working for him fell apart.
Either Elena was lying about the threats, or someone else entirely was responsible for the killings. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued.
"We ran Elena's name through our databases, and she doesn't exist. Elena Vasquez is a completely clean identity, no criminal record, no employment history beyond the past 6 months, no educational records, nothing. It's like she appeared out of thin air earlier this year."
Sarah's hands clenched into fists as the implications of this discovery hit her.
A false identity, a story that explained away every aspect of their investigation, and a convenient appearance just when they thought they had cornered their suspect.
Elena wasn't the victim she claimed to be.
"We need to end this interview now," Sarah said, already heading toward the door.
"Elena isn't a witness, she's our sniper." But, when they entered the interview room, Elena was gone.
The window was open, and the metal screen that should have prevented anyone from climbing out lay twisted on the floor.
Elena had somehow managed to escape from a second-story interview room in a busy police station without anyone noticing. Locked down the building, Rodriguez barked into his radio.
"All units, we have a suspect escape from interview room 3. Suspect is a woman, approximately 5'6", dark hair, wearing dark clothing.
Consider her armed and extremely dangerous."
Sarah rushed to the open window and looked down at the alley behind the police station. There was no sign of Elena, but a fire escape ladder provided an obvious route to the ground level. She had planned her escape carefully, choosing to sit near the window during the interview and probably working to loosen the screen while they talked.
"How long since anyone checked on her?" Sarah asked the uniformed officer who had been stationed outside the interview room.
"Maybe 10 minutes, the officer replied, his face pale with the realization of what had happened. "She asked for some water, and I went to get it from the break room. When I came back, the room was empty." 10 minutes was more than enough time for someone with military training to escape from the building and disappear into the crowded streets surrounding the police station. Elena could be anywhere in the city by now, and they had no way of tracking her. Dr. Foster appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "I've been reviewing the psychological profile we developed for our sniper," she said.
"If Elena is our suspect, then everything we thought we knew about this case needs to be reconsidered." Over the next several hours, the task force worked frantically to piece together Elena's true identity and motivations. The breakthrough came when a facial recognition search finally returned a match from military databases. "Elena Martinez," Dr. Foster announced to the assembled team.
Former Army sniper, served 3 tours in Afghanistan before being discharged 2 years ago for psychological reasons. Her real name is Elena Martinez, and Marcus Rodriguez was indeed her brother, but not by birth. They were both part of the same foster family as children. Sarah studied the military file that had been transmitted to their station. Elena's service record was impressive and disturbing in equal measure. She had been one of the Army's most skilled snipers, with confirmed kills exceeding 50 and a reputation for being able to operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods. According to her psychological evaluation, Dr. Foster continued, Elena was suffering from severe PTSD and had developed what her therapists described as a detachment from reality. She believed that her fellow soldiers were being systematically targeted by enemies who had infiltrated the military command structure.
"So what happened to Marcus Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer.
"Marcus was trying to get Elena into treatment," Dr. Foster explained. According to his co-workers, he had been taking time off work to drive Elena to therapy appointments and had been trying to convince her to check herself into a psychiatric facility. The construction site where he was working was only a few blocks from the VA hospital where Elena was supposed to be receiving treatment. The horrifying picture that emerged from Elena's military file and medical records painted a portrait of someone whose grip on reality had been shattered by years of combat and who had constructed an elaborate fantasy to explain her brother's death. In Elena's mind, Marcus hadn't been killed by her in a moment of paranoid delusion, he had been murdered by mysterious enemies who were now hunting her. The other victims, Sarah said, the full scope of Elena's crimes becoming clear. She killed them because she believed they were part of some conspiracy against her? Dr. Foster nodded grimly. Based on her psychiatric profile, Elena likely sees threats everywhere. Each of the subsequent victims probably did something, walked too close to her hiding place, looked at her the wrong way, appeared at the wrong time, that triggered her paranoid delusions. In her mind, she's been defending herself against a vast conspiracy rather than murdering innocent people. Sarah thought about the careful organization she had seen in Elena's makeshift command center in the warehouse. The maps, the surveillance photos, the meticulous planning that had gone into each attack. Elena wasn't simply a mentally ill person acting randomly, she was a highly trained soldier whose illness had turned her skills toward a twisted purpose. The question now is where she would go, Rodriguez said. Elena knows we've identified her, and she knows we're looking for her. Someone with her training could disappear completely if they wanted to. But Sarah had a different theory about Elena's next move. Throughout her time in the interview room, Elena had seemed genuinely agitated whenever they discussed the possibility that her pursuer was still at large. Even after her escape, Elena would still believe that someone was hunting her, and her military training would tell her that the best defense was a strong offense. She's not going to run, Sarah said with growing certainty. Elena thinks we're part of the conspiracy against her now. She's going to try to eliminate the threat we represent. As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have interfered. Now you're part of it too. The blood drained from Sarah's face as she showed the message to the others. Elena wasn't fleeing, she was preparing for war against what she perceived as her enemies. And now Sarah and the entire task force had been added to her list of targets. We need to get everyone to safety, Rodriguez said, already reaching for his radio. Elena knows where we work, probably knows where we live. Everyone on this task force is now a potential target. But Sarah knew that running wasn't the answer. Elena was too skilled, too determined, and too detached from reality to be stopped by conventional law enforcement tactics. Someone with her training could hunt them indefinitely, picking them off one by one while staying hidden in the urban landscape she had learned to navigate. There's another way, Sarah said, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Elena still believes someone else is hunting her. What if we could convince her that we've caught that person? What if we could draw her out by making her think the threat is over? Dr. Foster looked skeptical. Elena's delusions are deeply entrenched. She's not going to abandon them just because we tell her the threat is gone. Her mind has constructed this conspiracy to explain her brother's death and justify her subsequent actions. Taking that away from her would mean confronting the reality that she murdered Marcus herself. Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of what they were dealing with. Elena's mental illness wasn't just causing her to see threats that didn't exist, it was protecting her from a truth she couldn't bear to face. Breaking through those delusions would require more than just evidence or logical arguments. As the task force worked through the night to develop a plan for capturing Elena, Sarah found herself thinking about the woman she had met in the warehouse. Beneath the carefully constructed false identity and the elaborate delusions, there had been something genuinely tragic about Elena's situation. A soldier broken by war, a sister destroyed by grief, a person whose mind had shattered under pressures that would have crushed most people. But sympathy for Elena's mental illness couldn't change the fact that she had murdered 8 innocent people and was planning to kill more. Whatever plan they developed would have to account for Elena's military training, her intimate knowledge of the industrial district where she had been hiding, and her complete detachment from the moral constraints that govern normal human behavior. As dawn approached, Sarah stood at the window of the police station, looking out at the city where Elena was hiding somewhere among millions of potential victims. In a few hours, they would put their plan into action, using themselves as bait to draw Elena into the open. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but Sarah couldn't see any alternative. Elena had emerged from the darkness of the warehouse as a victim seeking help, but she had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous, a predator who saw enemies everywhere and had the skills to eliminate them with terrifying efficiency. Now it was up to Sarah and her team to stop Elena before she claimed any more victims. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets, but Sarah knew that for Elena, darkness was never far away. Somewhere in those shadows, a broken soldier was preparing for a war that existed only in her mind, and Sarah would have to enter that darkness to bring her out. The plan was deceptively simple, which made Sarah nervous. Simple plans had a way of becoming complicated when they involved someone as unpredictable and dangerous as Elena Martinez. They would use the local news media to announce that Vincent Carrera's killer had been captured, suggesting that the threat to Elena's family had finally been eliminated. If Elena was monitoring the news, as they suspected she was, this might convince her to come out of hiding. Sarah sat in the media briefing room, watching Captain Rodriguez address a room full of reporters. The story he was telling was carefully crafted by Dr. Foster to appeal to Elena's psychological state, a tale of conspiracy and betrayal that would seem to validate her beliefs while providing a reason for her to lower her guard. The individual responsible for the threats against the Rodriguez family has been taken into custody, Rodriguez announced to the cameras. This person was working independently and posed no threat to the general public. The series of random shootings in the industrial district appears to be unrelated to this case. As Sarah watched the captain deliver his prepared statement, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. Elena wasn't just mentally ill, she was exceptionally intelligent and had spent months studying their investigation methods. There was a very real possibility that she would see through their deception and realize they were trying to manipulate her. The media briefing was scheduled to air on the evening news, which gave them several hours to position themselves around the industrial district. If Elena believed their story, she might return to one of her previous hiding places to collect belongings or simply because those locations felt safe to her. The task force had identified 7 buildings where Elena had definitely spent time, and they had teams watching all of them. Sarah found herself assigned to the warehouse where they had first encountered Elena, along with Detective Morrison and 2 tactical officers. As they took their positions in a building across the street, Sarah studied the windows where she had seen Elena's silhouette just 2 days earlier. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then.
"You really think she'll come back here?"
Morrison asked, adjusting his position behind a pile of debris they were using for cover. Sarah wasn't sure, but something about Elena's attachment to the warehouse made her think it was possible. Elena had set up an elaborate command center there, and people with military training often became attached to positions they had prepared and fortified. If Elena believed the threat against her was truly over, she might return to collect the surveillance materials she had left behind. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about Elena's military service and the trauma that had broken her mind. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 50 confirmed kills, and a psychological evaluation that described someone who had become completely detached from normal human emotion. The Elena who had emerged from that war was not the same person who had entered it. Dr. Foster's voice came through their radio, providing updates from the command center.
"We're monitoring all known frequencies Elena might use for communication. So far, no indication that she's aware of our operation."
But Sarah wondered if they would even know if Elena had detected their trap. Someone with Elena's training would be capable of recognizing surveillance and avoiding detection while she studied their positions and planned her response.
They might think they were hunting Elena when she was actually hunting them.
As evening approached and the news broadcast aired, Sarah felt her nerves becoming increasingly frayed. Every shadow in the abandoned district seemed to conceal a potential threat, and she found herself starting at sounds that turned out to be nothing more than wind blowing through broken windows or rats moving through the debris.
The call came in just after 8 o'clock.
A patrol unit had spotted movement in Sector 5, 3 blocks from their position. Sarah's heart raced as she listened to the radio chatter describing a figure moving between buildings in the area where Elena had been seen several times during their investigation. "All units, maintain position," Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio.
"Do not pursue. Let the subject come to us."
Sarah gripped her weapon tighter and focused her attention on the street below their hiding place.
If Elena was moving through the district, there was a good chance she would pass near their location.
The warehouse had been her primary base of operations, and she had personal belongings there that she might want to retrieve.
20 minutes passed in tense silence before Sarah saw her.
Elena moved like a ghost through the shadows cast by the streetlights, staying close to building walls and avoiding the open spaces where she might be seen. She was carrying what appeared to be a military-style backpack and moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of moving unseen through hostile territory. Elena paused at the entrance to the warehouse, and Sarah could see her studying the building carefully before approaching. Even from a distance, it was clear that Elena was being cautious, checking for signs that the area was being watched or that someone had been there since her escape from the police station. "Target acquired," Sarah whispered into her radio.
"Subject is approaching the primary location." Elena disappeared into the warehouse, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken as they prepared to move.
The plan called for them to wait until Elena was inside and focused on whatever she had come to retrieve, then surround the building and attempt to negotiate her surrender. But, as they prepared to leave their concealed position, Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. "All units, we have shots fired in Sector 7.
Multiple casualties reported."
Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis as she processed this information.
If Elena was in the warehouse below them, who was shooting in Sector 7? Had they been completely wrong about Elena's location, or were they dealing with something even worse than they had imagined?
"Detective Chen," Dr. Foster's voice came through the radio, tense with urgency. "I need you to maintain visual contact with your subject. The shooting in Sector 7 may be a diversion." Sarah adjusted her position to get a better view of the warehouse entrance and saw Elena emerging from the building much sooner than they had expected. Instead of the backpack she had been carrying when she entered, Elena now had what appeared to be a rifle case slung over her shoulder. Elena moved quickly through the shadows, but instead of heading away from the district as they had expected, she began moving towards Sector 7 where the shooting had been reported. Sarah realized with growing horror that Elena hadn't come to the warehouse to collect belongings, she had come to retrieve a weapon. "She's armed and moving towards Sector 7, Sarah reported, already heading for the stairs. "All units in Sector 7, be advised that our primary suspect is heading in your direction." As Sarah and her team raced through the empty streets trying to intercept Elena, the radio continued to crackle with updates from Sector 7 that painted an increasingly chaotic picture. 3 officers had been shot, though all were reported to be alive and in stable condition. The shooter appeared to be using a high-powered rifle and was engaging targets from multiple elevated positions.
Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. If Elena was moving towards Sector 7 with a rifle, and there was already a shooter active in that area, were they dealing with 2 separate snipers? Had Elena been working with an accomplice all along?
As they rounded a corner that would bring Sector 7 into view, Sarah saw something that stopped her in her tracks. Elena was crouched behind a pile of debris, her rifle assembled and aimed at one of the buildings where muzzle flashes had been visible just moments before.
Elena wasn't joining the attack on the police officers in Sector 7.
She was attacking the attacker. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Elena fired a single shot that was immediately followed by the sound of someone falling inside the building she had been targeting. The muzzle flashes from that building stopped, and the radio chatter indicated that the shooting in Sector 7 had suddenly ceased. "All units, gunfire has stopped in Sector 7.
Unknown if shooter is down or has relocated."
Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. Elena had just shot someone who appeared to have been attacking police officers, but Elena herself was their primary suspect in 8 murders.
Was Elena defending the police, or was this some kind of elaborate setup to make herself appear heroic?
Elena stood up from her position and began walking toward the building where the other shooter had been located, her rifle held ready but not aimed at any of the police officers who were now visible in the area.
Sarah realized that Elena was giving them an opportunity to take her into custody without a fight. "This is Detective Chen," Sarah said into her radio. "I have visual contact with Elena Martinez. She appears to have engaged and possibly eliminated a second shooter. Requesting instructions." Dr. Foster's voice came back immediately.
"Approach with extreme caution.
Elena may be attempting to manipulate the situation to her advantage."
But, as Sarah watched Elena move through the debris-strewn street, she began to suspect that something much more complex was happening.
Elena's body language didn't suggest someone who was trying to deceive or manipulate.
Instead, she moved with the resigned purposefulness of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to accept the consequences. Elena reached the building where the other shooter had been positioned and disappeared inside. Sarah could hear her moving around inside, and, after a few minutes, Elena's voice called out loud enough to be heard across the street.
"He's dead," Elena announced.
"Vincent Carrera's real killer is dead."
Sarah felt her understanding of the case shift yet again as Elena emerged from the building dragging the body of a man dressed in dark tactical clothing.
Even from a distance, Sarah could see that the man was carrying professional-grade equipment and appeared to have been seriously wounded before Elena's shot had finished him.
"My name is Elena Martinez," Elena called out, clearly addressing the police officers who were now surrounding the area.
"I killed Marcus Rodriguez 3 months ago during a psychotic episode. I've been hunting the man who was hired to clean up the mess ever since." Sarah approached slowly, her weapon drawn but not aimed at Elena. The pieces of an incredibly complex puzzle were finally starting to fit together in her mind, but the picture they revealed was more tragic and horrifying than anything she could have imagined. "Elena," Sarah called out when she was close enough to speak without shouting. "I need you to put down your weapon and help me understand what's been happening." Elena set her rifle on the ground and raised her hands, but her eyes remained fixed on the dead man she had dragged from the building. "His name is Thomas Kellerman," she said. "He's a professional cleaner who specializes in eliminating witnesses and covering up crimes. Vincent Carrera hired him to kill me after I murdered Marcus, but Kellerman decided it would be easier to make it look like a serial killer was targeting random victims." Sarah felt the final pieces of the puzzle click into place as Elena's words sank in. Elena had indeed killed her brother during a psychotic break, but she had retained enough awareness to realize what she had done. Instead of turning herself in, she had been hunting the professional assassin who had been hired to kill her, while that same assassin had been murdering innocent people to create cover for Elena's eventual death. "The other victims," Sarah said, the full scope of the tragedy becoming clear. "Kellerman killed them to make it look like you were a serial killer."
Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks.
"I tried to stop him. Every time he killed someone else, I tried to find him and make him stop. But he was always one step ahead of me until tonight." As the tactical teams moved in to secure Elena and process the scene, Sarah found herself looking at a case that defied every assumption they had made about criminal behavior and mental illness. Elena was simultaneously a murderer who had killed her own brother and a vigilante who had spent months trying to prevent the deaths of innocent people. The woman who had emerged from the darkness of the warehouse had been both victim and perpetrator, hunter and hunted, all at the same time. And now, as Elena was finally taken into custody for the murder of Marcus Rodriguez, Sarah realized that justice in this case would be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the courthouse waiting for the jury to return with their verdict in the case of the People versus Elena Martinez. The trial had been unlike anything she had ever witnessed, challenging every assumption about justice, mental illness, and moral responsibility that the legal system was built upon. Elena had confessed to killing her brother Marcus Rodriguez during what psychiatrists had diagnosed as a severe psychotic episode triggered by untreated PTSD. But she had also saved the lives of countless potential victims by hunting down and eliminating Thomas Kellerman, the professional assassin who had been murdering innocent people to create cover for Elena's planned execution. The courtroom had been packed throughout the trial, with victims' families sitting alongside veterans' advocacy groups and mental health professionals. The case had become a lightning rod for debates about how society treats its returning soldiers and what happens when the people trained to protect others become dangers themselves. Dr. Amanda Foster sat beside Sarah in the gallery, reviewing the thick file she had compiled on Elena's psychological state.
The profile that had emerged during months of evaluation was heartbreaking in its complexity.
Elena was a decorated war hero who had broken under the strain of combat, a loving sister who had killed the person she cared about most, and a trained killer who had spent her final months of freedom trying to prevent other deaths.
"The jury's been out for 8 hours," Dr. Foster observed quietly. "That's either very good or very bad for Elena."
Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on Elena herself, sitting at the defendant's table between her two court-appointed attorneys.
Over the months since her arrest, Elena had undergone intensive psychiatric treatment and medication therapy that had helped stabilize her condition. The Elena who sat in the courtroom was lucid, remorseful, and painfully aware of the full scope of what she had done. The prosecutor had argued for a first-degree murder conviction, maintaining that Elena's military training and her attempts to cover up her brother's death demonstrated premeditation and an understanding of right and wrong. The fact that she had later hunted Kellerman, he argued, proved that she was capable of rational planning and decision-making. But Elena's defense team had painted a different picture.
They presented evidence of Elena's exemplary military service, her struggles with PTSD, and the complete psychological breakdown that had led to Marcus's death. Character witnesses had testified about Elena's devotion to her brother and her desperate attempts to get help for her mental health problems before the tragedy occurred. The most compelling testimony had come from the families of Thomas Kellerman's victims. One by one, they had taken the stand to describe how Elena's actions had prevented their loved ones from becoming statistics in a professional killer's campaign of misdirection. Janet Lou's mother had openly wept as she thanked Elena for ensuring that her daughter's killer would never harm another family. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her ex-husband David. Despite their divorce, which had been finalized 2 months after Elena's arrest, David had followed the case closely and had been surprisingly supportive during Sarah's testimony about the investigation. Watching the news coverage, his message read, "You did good work on this case." Elena needed someone to see her as more than just a killer. Sarah smiled sadly as she put her phone away. The case had cost her marriage, but it had also taught her something important about the nature of justice and redemption. Elena Martinez was undeniably a killer who had taken her brother's life in a moment of madness, but she was also a person who had spent her final months of freedom trying to atone for that crime by protecting others. The bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom. "All rise. The jury has reached a verdict." Sarah felt her heart racing as the 12 men and women who would decide Elena's fate filed back into the courtroom. Elena stood with her attorneys, her shoulders straight and her expression calm despite the tears that were visible on her cheeks. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Patricia Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied, a middle-aged man whose own son had served in Iraq and who had been visibly moved by testimony about Elena's military service. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" Sarah held her breath as the foreman opened the folded paper containing the verdict. "Not guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed immediately by the judge's gavel calling for order. "On the charge of voluntary manslaughter, how do you find?" "Guilty." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness as the verdict sank in. Elena would face significant prison time for killing her brother, but the jury had recognized that her actions were the result of mental illness rather than malicious intent. But the foreman wasn't finished. "Your Honor, the jury would like to add a recommendation for leniency based on the defendant's mental health struggles and her subsequent actions to prevent harm to others." Judge Morrison nodded gravely. The court acknowledges the jury's recommendation. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month, at which time the court will consider all relevant factors including the defendant's military service, mental health status, and the unique circumstances of this case. As the courtroom began to empty, Sarah watched Elena being led away by the bailiffs. Elena had turned to look back at the gallery, and her eyes had found Sarah's. For a moment, their gazes held across the crowded room, and Sarah saw something in Elena's expression that she had never seen before: peace. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a letter at the police station. The return address indicated it came from the county jail where Elena was being held pending sentencing.
Sarah opened it carefully, unsure what Elena might have to say to her. Detective Chen, the letter began in Elena's neat handwriting.
I wanted to thank you for seeing me as a person rather than just a case to be solved. I know that my actions caused tremendous pain and that nothing I do can bring back the people who died because of my illness. But I also know that you understood why I had to stop Kellerman, even though it meant putting yourself and your colleagues in danger. I've been working with Dr. Foster to understand what happened to my mind during those months after Marcus died. The medication has helped me see clearly for the first time in years, and, while the clarity is often painful, it's also a gift. I can finally grieve for Marcus properly and accept responsibility for what I did to him. I will probably spend many years in prison, and I accept that as appropriate punishment for taking my brother's life. But I hope that my case might help other veterans who are struggling with similar problems. If one person gets the help they need because of what happened to me, then maybe some good can come from all this tragedy. Thank you for believing that there was still something human left in me when I emerged from that warehouse. It made all the difference. The letter was signed simply Elena and included a small drawing of a butterfly, which Elena had explained during her testimony was something Marcus used to draw for her when they were children in foster care. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. Elena's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Sarah planned to attend to provide a statement about Elena's cooperation during the investigation and her role in stopping Kellerman. The case had changed Sarah's perspective on justice and mental illness in ways she was still trying to understand. Elena Martinez was both perpetrator and victim, killer and protector, all contained within one deeply damaged human being who had been failed by the systems designed to help her. On the day of Elena's sentencing, Sarah sat in the same courthouse where the verdict had been delivered. Elena's attorneys had presented compelling evidence about her military service, her struggles with PTSD, and her genuine remorse for her actions. The prosecution had maintained that Elena's crime could not be excused by her mental illness, but they had also acknowledged her cooperation in stopping a professional killer. Judge Morrison had listened carefully to all the testimony before announcing her decision. Elena Martinez, you have been found guilty of voluntary manslaughter in the death of your brother Marcus Rodriguez. This court recognizes the tragic circumstances that led to this crime and the extraordinary steps you took to prevent further loss of life. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 7 years. The court strongly recommends that you continue receiving psychiatric treatment throughout your incarceration and that you be considered for placement in a facility equipped to treat veterans with combat-related mental health issues. Sarah had felt a sense of closure as Elena was led away to begin serving her sentence. It wasn't a perfect resolution, nothing could bring back Marcus Rodriguez or the 7 innocent people who had died at Thomas Kellerman's hands, but it was as close to justice as the imperfect human systems of law and medicine could provide. 3 years later, Sarah received another letter from Elena, this time from a minimum security prison where Elena was participating in a program designed to help incarcerated veterans. Elena had completed her college degree and was working as a counselor for other inmates struggling with PTSD and substance abuse issues. I think about Marcus every day, Elena wrote, but I can finally remember him as he was when he was alive rather than only thinking about how he died. The guilt will never go away completely, but I've learned to carry it in a way that honors his memory rather than destroying what's left of my life. I know I can never undo what I did or bring back the people who died because of my actions. But I can try to help others avoid the path I took. Every veteran I help get treatment for PTSD, every person I convince to seek help before their problems become overwhelming, is a small step toward making amends for the harm I caused. Thank you again for seeing past the killer to find the person underneath. It gave me hope when I had none, and it started me on the path toward healing. Sarah had kept that letter too, along with the updates Elena continued to send about her progress in prison and her work with other veterans. Elena would be eligible for parole in 4 more years, and Sarah found herself hoping that the parole board would recognize the genuine transformation that had occurred. The woman who had emerged from the darkness of that warehouse had been broken in ways that seemed irreparable. But, through treatment, accountability, and the slow process of making amends, Elena had found a way to rebuild herself into someone who could contribute to healing rather than causing harm.
Sarah often thought about the case when she encountered other situations involving mental illness and crime.
Elena's story had taught her that justice was not always about punishment, and that even people who had committed terrible acts could find ways to atone and contribute to society. The darkness that had consumed Elena Martinez for those terrible months had been real and devastating. But, somewhere in that darkness, the person Elena had been before the war, the loving sister who had tried to protect Marcus, the soldier who had served her country with distinction, had survived and, eventually emerged into the light. As Sarah finished reading Elena's latest letter, which described her upcoming parole hearing and her plans to work with a veteran support organization if she was released, she reflected on the complex nature of justice and redemption. Elena would never stop being responsible for Marcus's death, but she had found a way to honor his memory and prevent others from following the same destructive path. The woman from the darkness had become a beacon of hope for others struggling in their own shadows, proving that even the most broken people could find ways to heal and help heal others. It wasn't the ending anyone would have chosen for this story, but it was perhaps the best ending that was possible given the tragic circumstances that had brought Elena Martinez into the light.